Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wheel of Mind, the Wheel of Time point of view reread podcast. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 3, where we're reading Nynaeve Almira's points of view. I'm your co host, Lajara Dane of the White Aja.
Hi, and I'm Giskel Cimarus, a scholar from Ilion. For any new listeners to our series, I do want to remind you that The Wheel of Mine is an in depth character reread podcast, and we may drop spoilers at random times, so this is your only spoiler warning. Today, we are examining The Great Hunt, chapters 42, 45, and 46.
And I'll get us started with my summary of Chapter 42, Falma, which opens on Nynaeve and Elaine wearing local farm garb as disguises. They've been renting a room above a fishmonger for a few weeks, escaping the Shanchen patrols trying to find women who could channel. They didn't have a lot of money, and things cost so much more than Nynaeve had expected. She skipped meals, and Elaine had started to notice. The daughter heir, on the other hand, took the risk of channeling to cause a distraction and steal some apples. Nynaeve scolded her for doing so, continuing to insist she was not hungry even if she ate one of the apples. They needed to be more careful and avoid Suldam and Damane pairs or the soldiers who rode by on strange beasts. Of course, Nynaeve herself had channeled while one of the leash holders walked a Damane nearby, but that was different. She had to figure out how to open the collars. They couldn't very well try and rescue Egwene without knowing how the thing worked, could they? They were disgusting inventions, though, but Nynaeve still found herself wanting to use one on Leandrin in revenge. Elaine was especially dismayed at how the people of Falma did not appear to resist the Shanchen. They bowed and scraped and looked frightened and became closed-mouthed when, early on, they had asked around to find some pockets of resistance. Shouldn't these people be their enemies? But what choice did they have? Quote, "How could you fight monsters in Aes Sedai?" Nynaeve thought. End quote. She and Elaine made their way to the house that was known to hold only Suldam and Damane. Egwene and even Min were probably in there, but they had no idea how to get in. Even knowing how to open the collar would be useless if they couldn't get to her. They sat, watched inconspicuously, and planned while they ate the rest of the apples. And thus ends Nynaeve's perspective in Chapter 42, Falma.
I found a lot of irony in Nynaeve's character in this chapter where she's
Oh,
so
yeah.
she's so scandalized that Elaine not only stole the apples. I mean, not only was she scandalized and wanted to switch her for that, but the fact that Elaine did not look the least bit embarrassed or guilty about doing it. So she was just so scandalized. You could tell that Nynaeve wanted to just melt into the paving stones and not even be there, or take Elaine and switch her real good like a small errant child. And then she turns around and eats the apple
Yep.
with no qualm, no hesitation, and the entire time, harping on Elaine for what she'd done. So yeah, find that a little out of character for her, but I guess that shows how different you are when you're hungry.
Yes.
Yeah, she definitely, there's several points in this story where she needs a Snickers and a timeout. But
Yeah, that's not the only place where she has this kind of hypocrisy. She claims that she's not hungry still, even while she's eating the apple. So there's a couple of points about the apple there. And then she also criticizes Elaine for covertly channeling when she had done so herself in a way more obvious way, as she kind of retells us in the flashback of her thoughts of how she had tried to open a demonic collar, and the Damane alerted the Suldam to their presence, which is what surprised them both. They had to hide for
right,
3 days while the whole city was looking for the people who had caused this disturbance. So,
right, right.
yeah, that was probably the biggest point of hypocrisy that I found from her in this chapter.
Yes, and it's more in keeping with Elaine's character, who, remember, knows no fear whatsoever. Elaine
Yeah.
just she does not have a typical fear response to many situations because she has never really faced much in her life outside of her control.
Right. I
So
think
she
that's a
really is,
good point. That at
yeah,
this early stage in the story, her lack of fear, her bravery is more naivete than anything.
yes, yes, I agree. And later on, she has men's viewing that she keeps falling back on. So she
Right.
at least has reasons for it or explanations for it later. But at this point in time, it's just, yeah, that's very much in keeping with Elaine's nature, though. But Nynaeve to fuss at Elaine here, and Elaine's like, well, I looked and there were no Damane or Suldam around. When Nynaeve channeled, as you said, the flashback, she was actually channeling at the
Yeah.
Adom, the collar. So they, there was a Suldam and a Damane there.
Yeah, pretty much the
And she,
riskiest, uh,
y-
sphere for
yeah,
people, yeah.
right. You cannot make it any worse than that. So, and she talked about how she used just the barest trickle of power, just the least amount, so no one would notice. Now, Nynaeve is not known for either tact or subtlety. And so I think, with her using the merest trickle of power, and Elaine described it like, she lit up like a bonfire. So
Yeah.
Nynaeve doesn't really know her own strength, but again, she doesn't know how to finesse things, how to do things subtly. She's just right out in the open. She is who she is. She doesn't apologize for who she is, but she doesn't try to hide anything either. So she's a woman in whom there's very little guile, although we do see a little hypocrisy here. But again, she's very Matt Cawthon like in always having an excuse or a reason for taking a
Mhm.
chance. A very
Absolutely.
good one in her mind, right? So I really enjoy that about her character and some of the things, I guess all of these parallels that I never noticed until we were going through season 2 with our Matt Cawthon, when you pointed out many times how they're parallel in so many ways, and now I cannot help but see it in so many of the interactions here.
Right, once it was pointed out to me, because I know this is not a new, idea in the fandom, I couldn't unsee it for sure, and I have to keep making those comparisons almost every Nynaeve episode now. Um, it's interesting to me how she you say she doesn't have a lot of guile or subtlety, and she doesn't in a lot of aspects, especially if there's any, I don't know, disagreement with members of a party she's traveling with or whatever. Um, or if she is trying to kind of cover up something she's ashamed of doing or something like that, she's just going to flat out deny it. But here, she does actually come up with pretty good plans. She realizes one of the steps, at least, of this puzzle is going to have to be opening the collar. And it seems like she's the one pretty much driving the plans. We don't hear much about Elaine had an idea to do this or Elaine was going to do that. Even in the upcoming chapters, Nynaeve is the leader. And it only makes sense because of her having had leadership in the past and being the oldest of the group and everything. Or she might be around the same age as Min, but they haven't seen Min, a lot, kind of been coming and going. But Nynaeve
Right.
has taken on this leadership role that seems fairly unquestioned at this point. Elaine, this is pretty early in Elaine and Nynaeve's relationship, and they become very antagonistic throughout much of the series when they're around each other a lot. Here, Elaine does still end up deferring to her for the most part. They argue a little bit here and there, but Elaine is still going along with Nynaeve's plans. Nynaeve is still leading this rescue mission, and that's the same for um, the rest of the chapters we're going to cover in this episode. Nynaeve is still a leader, but I don't think that lasts very long throughout her arc. So I want to kind of keep an eye on that in future episodes and see where does her authority kind of wane and the other characters grow, to the point that they're more treating each other as equals.
Ah, yeah, yeah, that'll be fun to look at because I do know there is a progression there. But yeah, just kind of see when that happens and watch it as it happens, I think would be good. Now, Nynaeve always remains somewhat bossy, somewhat of a bully when
Yeah.
she wants to be. But you're right. She doesn't have to have her way all the time. But right now, she pretty much gets her way most of the time.
Yeah. And it
Um,
works here, to be fair. I mean, her
yeah,
plans actually get
right.
pulled off very well.
Right. Well, I mean, she is a woman who has had to stand on her own, lost both her parents at a
Mhm.
younger age, has had to stand on her own for quite some time now, and had a place of authority within the women's uh, circle there back in Emmons Field. And when you have been in charge, it's very difficult to assume a role of not being in charge anymore,
Yeah.
especially, you've been over a group of people. It's you have to make a conscious effort not to do that, not to continue being in charge, because there is a certain way that you carry yourself, and when they've described it many times in the series with Elaine and with her mother, Morghese, of just having a commanding presence and saying things, expecting people to listen, to obey, to do what they say. And that is a leadership quality that oftentimes, especially if you do it not in a mean way, but in a confident way, people respond to that. Many people just assume you're in charge and they begin acting that way. So we see that Nynaeve has done this for years, and it just carries over into every situation she walks into until she learns, okay, in this situation or with this group of people, I'm not in charge.
Yeah.
And yeah, we have to see that. But the the person who has formerly been a leader has to make that conscious effort or has to have it forced upon them, one of the
Mm.
two, in order to stop acting that way around everybody. So yeah, it's something I think we'll see happen as her character grows and changes. But I do like it. Now, one thing here I did mention that she lost her parents at an early age. I don't recall when she lost her mother, but with her father, she was old enough that he could teach her kind of be tomboyish to,
Mhm.
do all the outdoor things. So he was a little older. Now, I'm going to throw a theory out here that I've developed on my own, and other people may have as well, but I don't know. Since we're not told how she lost her father, I begin to wonder if he may not have been able to channel because
Oh.
she is so strong in the power. I mean, very strong in the power, stronger than Egwene. And Egwene is one that amazes the women of the tower with her strength. And yet we see that Nynaeve is a bonfire beside Egwene and Elaine's candle, I think is how Moiraine put it
Mhm.
earlier on in this book. So, it just made me wonder because we know that some of the ability with the one power is hereditary, and that's one of the
Right.
reasons it's been dying out and the tower has been losing strength over the years because they're not passing on these genetics. But there's not, I don't think a lot of proof one way or the other. It's just a theory. I begin to wonder if maybe he couldn't channel and, perhaps when he realized that he could, he took his own life or managed to die young to prevent, his family from watching him go crazy and destroy everyone he loved.
Mm.
Again, I have absolutely no proof for it. It's one of these things I just thought of as I spend too much time on the road by myself.
It's one of those things that, as far as we know, it's not true. So
Right,
there's
right,
room to put the headcanon in there and kinda let it grow, and I really like that.
right.
I think
Uh,
part of the reason we can do that with these books is that I mean, we've talked a lot already about how it feels like these characters did exist before we came into the story and that they continue to exist
yes,
afterward. That's a great point, and I wonder too if for her having such strength in the power, she had 2 channeling parents, and that might help
right.
explain it, whereas some of the others just had 1. Um,
Yeah,
I don't know. That's
I
interesting though.
like that.
Yeah.
Again, we can throw theories out there, and I don't know that there's a way to either prove it or disprove it, but we can mold that around in our minds, see how it fits. With a story this large, there are many tiny little loose ends that you can take and weave into your own head canon, add it into your imagination as to part of the story. And you can do that with thousands of different things because this story is so huge.
Mhm.
Anyway, so yeah, a good chapter here. This Falma is one that, in my mind, I imagine it very much like Ibu Dar, even though the cities are not described the same. Both of them
Yeah.
being a town with a port, and the Xianchan being there. So it's natural to get some of the events mashed together in your mind between these two, or
Yes.
mixed up between these two. But I find myself liking the Falma conclusion here to the Great Hunt very much because it is one of the few places in Jordan's story where we're not overloaded with detail. It seems like the events happen just lightning fast.
Mhm.
We go you know, from right here, from they're planning this escape to within just a chapter or two, they're beginning the escape. And of course, we have all the things happening with Rand and Matt and Perrin as well simultaneously. These events are all coalescing here in Falma. So yeah, a lot of great things happening, and it's uh, fun to see these come together, but it happens so fast. It's very much unlike a lot of the events in the story because we know how parts of the story get loaded down with details. So this is one that, even though it, in my mind, at times I confuse some things between Falma and Ibu Dar, I
Hmm.
love the Falma sections of the story so much more because it's rapid, it's fast paced. We find a lot of information in just a few pages, and he really he hits us in the face with this very quickly, and it's kind of a dazzling part of the story.
Yes, I think Eye of the World has a quick conclusion after a lot of build up too, but the ending is so much more confusing that it doesn't feel as satisfying in the same way. And The Dragon
Yeah,
Reborn is another one of those that where everybody comes together in the last, it feels like 10 minutes of reading it almost, and
right.
last 50 pages or something is when everything really pops off. And Another one that ends like that is probably Lord of Chaos too, after a whole lot of build up, but
Yes.
many of the others do not wrap up in this way. And The Great Hunt is listed very high in a lot of people's favorites. I think probably for that reason. The
Yeah.
suspense is pulled off very well. And a lot
Right.
of it
Right.
is due to Nynaeve's careful planning here. Honestly, there's a lot of cool things that have to come
Yes.
together. There's
Right.
Rand having to duel the Blade Master and then also Balsamon. And that's actually happens in the next chapter we're going to cover, even though I'm not covering any of the Blade Master part of it. We get to see Nynaeve's plan to rescue Egwene progress a little bit more.
Oh yeah. Take us there whenever you're ready.
So, chapter 45, called Blade Master, finds Nynaeve waiting in the dawn chill, watching Min and Elaine across and down the street, respectively. Min waited with a large cloth sack, and Elaine had a bundle of dresses with her. Nynaeve worried that the other two women's nervous tics would give them away, and she reflected on her plan. If anything went badly, she had told them that she would run, like they said they would as well, but she really intended to draw attention to herself and let the others get away safely. She did not intend to be taken alive and collared. Just then, a sleepy Suldam and Damane pair strolled up the street. Only a few other early risers were out, and like most Falma people, they were sure to hide and pretend to have seen nothing where Shanchan and especially the leash holders and leash ones were involved. Nynaeve concentrated on the horrors Min had told her of how Egwene was kept. She had probably held back the worst of it, too. She got angry enough to channel a rope of Sidar that whipped open the Damane's collar. The stunned woman turned around and punched her leash holder in the face. Elaine and Min cheered her on, announcing themselves as friends, but the former Damane ran off. Nynaeve scolded them for making such a scene, and then she went and gagged the Suldam, and Min put the sack over the lady's head, and they dragged her off into an alley. And when she was reminded to, Elaine reluctantly picked up the dragging collar part of the Adom, seeming to be unharmed by doing so, which was a good bit of progress in the plan. They then took the Suldam to an abandoned stable. They stripped and bound her. They gave a better gag and kind of got settled to figure out what they were going to do next. The Suldam's dress just happened to fit Nynaeve the best, even though it wasn't perfect. So Elaine was going to have to put on one of the dyed Damane-like dresses that they brought with them. And that's just because she's the only one who could do it. Min would be too recognizable because of her visits to Egwene. But Elaine was reluctant, afraid of what the Adom might do to her, and Nynaeve really couldn't blame her for that. So quickly, she snapped the collar on the Suldam instead to try and question her. She soon learned that she could feel the woman's sensations and emotions through the leash. She also learned that she could inflict suffering just by thinking about it. And that's when she knew she couldn't put it on Elaine. They had their mock Damane, though, the woman who had called herself Seta and begged to be set free, seeming fearful of anyone seeing her in this condition. And they were able to put that fear to good use. Seta did not want to be seen in Damane costume any more than the rest of them wanted to be detected, so they were all kept safe by the threat of mutually assured destruction. Min acted like a serving woman, carrying all the discarded clothing behind them. Nynaeve hoped people really didn't look too closely at Damane because of how ill-fitting Seta's borrowed dress was. And I'm going to quote a short passage to end our part of the chapter here. "Where are we going?" Seta said, quickly adding, "if I may ask." "Into the lion's den," Elaine told her. "To dance with the Dark One," Min said. Nynaeve sighed and shook her head. "What they're trying to say is, we're going to where all the Damane are kept, and we intend to free one of them." End quote. And thus ends Nynaeve's perspective in chapter 45, Blade Master, which is so named because later in this chapter Rand fights and defeats the High Lord Turok.
This is one of those memorable chapters that sticks out in my mind, but basically because of Rand, not because of these events, although I
Yeah.
did like these. Uh, First time through the story, I didn't pick up on what a big deal this was that they put the collar on Seta. And of course, after our um, time with going through Matt's story and focusing on that, I remember who Seta was, but or Sita, however we pronounce it.
Mhm.
Um, I didn't so much, even on my second read through. It's like, oh, it's a Suldam. But
Yeah.
I didn't have her firmly fixed in my mind as to who she was and what role she would later play in the
Same.
story. And of course, we're going to be introduced to another Suldam in a minute, who you know is another one that is retained in the story later on. So, um, but yeah, so many fun things here when you break this down. Um, one of the things that really stuck in my mind is when Nynaeve is waiting in the alley or up by the street. They're wanting to capture a Suldam and Damane, and you know when it comes time for her to embrace the Source, Nynaeve intentionally gets angry by thinking of the things she's heard that was done to Egwene.
Yeah.
And of course, you mess with anybody from Emmons Field, and Nynaeve reacts with anger.
Yeah.
Um, I think she's could possibly be one of these people, and I know some people like this in real life. They feel like they have to be angry to face a tough situation. They don't know how to handle it without anger.
Mm.
It's not that she's a hateful person. It's not that she's a bad or mean person. It's just when she needs strength, she has to be angry to find her strength. And as we said, we've seen how that carried over into her block, where she has to be angry in order to access the one power. But I had another quote here, another little pull quote. It says, "In an instant, a white blossom on a black thorny branch had opened to the light to Sidar, and the one power filled her." So all of these
Mm.
images of the flower petals opening to the light in Nynaeve's mind, now that she's angry, it's a black thorny branch that opened to the light. That
Yes. And actually, oh man, I did not pull this quote in our last episode, but I should have because the blackthorn imagery, I think, first shows up, or if not for the first time, the most powerfully in her testing.
ah,
Okay, so here, I'm just trying to catch you up where we are before I start quoting. She looks around, there's a meadow still around her. She's, the seven towers and the thousand lakes, and she's there with Lan. And that's when she realizes nothing has changed. The Dark One hasn't been defeated. Her friends are still in danger. What about Rand, Madame Perrin? So I'm going to start the quote now at the next paragraph. "I must go back," she whispered, unable to bear the pain on his face. Unable to bear the pain on his face, she pulled free of him. Deliberately, she formed a flower bud in her mind, a white bud on a black thorn branch. She made the thorns sharp and cruel, wishing they could pierce her flesh, feeling as if she already hung in the blackthorn's branches. Shiriam Sadai's voice danced just out of hearing, telling her it was dangerous to attempt to channel the power. The bud opened, and Sidar filled her with light. And that's when there's a little bit of back and forth in the land. She opens the arch after picturing it. And when she tumbles through the archway and talks to Shiriam, then we get Nynaeve's hands quivered with a sudden pain she had not felt before. Driven through the palm of each hand, right in the center, was a long black thorn. Shiriam drew them out carefully. Nynaeve felt the cool healing of the Aes Sedai's touch. When each thorn came free, it left only a small scar on front and back of the hand. So she does actually retain these scars. I believe
oh, okay.
Shiriam is frowning at that, saying there shouldn't be any scarring. But it's interesting that uh, one of her most meaningful, like, angry channeling experiences was something she shouldn't have been able to do,
Right.
but somehow kind of through brute force overcame anyway. She used this blackthorn imagery to be able to do it. She kind of, manifested her anger in these thorns. And in this very Teleron Riyadh-like space of the testing environment that we don't know exactly how it works, she manifests those thorns as actually piercing her, and they leave not only these mental scars of kind of further cementing her block, but these physical scars on her hands that I don't think are ever brought up again. But I think it's just important to remember that they're there. They're probably there for her as that physical reminder of her block
Oh,
too.
wow. See, I did not recall that. That's chilling to think about. Of course, and it pierced all the way through her palm, so I didn't catch that until you're reading it
Yeah,
too, so
right, so she's got it on the
yeah,
back and the
very
palm is where her scars are. She can't hide
right,
them like Rand does his
right.
brands from
So it's
himself.
very stigmata-like imagery, of seeing her hands pierced completely through
Yeah.
like that, but, oh, wow. So she in her mind is still I wonder if that has to do with her fear of the one power, or hesitancy,
Mhm,
and as you said, she builds up the block. It's not really there in the beginning. Um, but you
mhm,
do notice that the more they talk about the block, the less she talks about listening to the wind and other things that she used to just do naturally when
yeah.
she was, uh, accessing the one power and not knowing it. So that's something that you really caught my attention with that last time, and I've looked more for that and understand it a little more because I don't believe I did. I always thought she always had the block and couldn't access power until she was
Yeah.
angry, but that's something that developed in finding out she could channel. Yeah, the thorns, the it's and seeing it this way as a black thorny branch, opening to the light rather than the petals of a flower. I wonder if that is because subconsciously she fears and in a sense hates the power because she grew up thinking it was
Mhm.
something evil and wrong and that Aes Sedai were bad and she can't really quite let go of that. But then again, she
Right.
has a prickly nature to her anyway, so perhaps it's just an offshoot of her personality that there's going to be thorns and you know something to be avoided, eh, mixed in with her mind when it comes to the imagery. But, oh, that is
Mm,
so cool.
yeah.
I know I've caught that, but I did not catch the significance of that, so I never remembered it in her testing. That is really awesome.
I am now finding myself really craving to see some Nynaeve fan art that has the thorns and the white blossoms around
Right,
her or something, something, sort of, uh, that looks like I don't know, almost like religious paintings or
right.
something. I feel like you could see like a stained glass window of the thorns around
Yeah.
her. Um, so yeah, maybe I'll commission that someday when I've got extra
Oh,
money to throw around.
well, when
Um,
Malkyr is rebuilt, we can imagine a stained glass window honoring her that her husband commissioned, and it will have that.
oh, that's beautiful. Oh my gosh, I love this headcanon we're building today. We've done so much of this.
Yes.
Oh man. I guess to get back to the chapter though, I mean, we haven't wandered from Nynaeve at least. We're
Right.
still really on target there because there's really endless stuff to talk about with her. Something I noticed in this chapter that doesn't stand out to me unless I'm doing a close read like this is a moment of her being very altruistic, at least in her mind. She didn't have to do this yet, but it was something she was thinking about. Most of the time, when I think of Nynaeve, when I'm not actively doing a reread like this and trying to pick out more details, I think of her anger, her stubbornness, maybe some of her later feats with the One Power, like her healing abilities and spoilers, healing stilling and madness. But here, she's ready to die a hero if need be. She is fully planning not to run away, to distract any Shan-Chan to let the other two women get away, and thinks that she would not be taken alive. And that's not something I usually think of first when I think of Nynaeve's character. I do think of how she likes to take care of her people, but I mean, Elaine and Min are not Emmons Fielders, and she's still willing to sacrifice herself in this way. So I think that's really uh, brave of her. Now, I don't know if it's something she would actually follow through with in the moment. I don't know how that would turn out. But I just think that's, yeah, I'm very big of her to have even planned
Yeah.
that.
This kind of thing, I think many of us have imagined being in a situation where we could, sacrifice ourselves to save friends or family or someone. But
Mhm.
to actually plan to put yourself in that situation is a much bigger step. Um, and
Yeah.
I do see this as being fitting with her personality because again, she left Emmons Field to come rescue the three boys and Egwene, and it's kind of changed and morphed into okay, I've got to see this whole thing through and be with them, even though she's with them
Mhm.
off and on very little of the time throughout the series. Um, she'll be with Egwene for a while. She'll be with Elaine for a while. She'll be with, just different ones, but she's never with the group again very often or very many times throughout the rest of the series. So it did change from that. But that was her original intent was, hey, I'm gonna go to Barrelon and get them and bring them home. And so she suffered all the nights out in the cold and everything else, following a Trolloc army, basically. I mean, you gotta really stop and think of that. That that yeah,
Yeah.
she was following the Trolloc army who was following them. So the timing.
Oh, wow. I didn't
Oh,
even
yeah.
think
I
about
mean, had the
that.
timing been off a little bit, she would have
Yeah.
died very early on in the story. So,
Mhm.
um, so she did risk her life, but I don't know that she knowingly planned to risk her life when it became necessary. Um,
Right.
I think she's more of a spur of the moment type person. But then when that moment hits, the anger is going to kick in, and if she gave her life to save someone else, she would do it kicking and screaming, spitting in Sightblinder's eye like any Aiel would do. I mean, she is every bit
Yes.
as tough as you want her to be. And I do like that about her, but yeah, it wouldn't be this quiet, peaceful, I'm gonna sacrifice myself. It would be clawing and biting down to the last moment of life. And you really have to commend her on that.
Absolutely. Not only is she planning carefully, planning altruistically, I mean, overall, her plan is pretty good. She also improvises when, new stuff comes up when they're trying to execute this plan. She is well prepared with these disguises and everything, but she can be flexible when new information comes up, like when she finds out that the ADOM actually works on the Suldon. And when she learns what it does, she immediately changes her mind that there's no way I can put this on Elaine,
Right.
but we can use this for something other than questioning. And I don't even know if questioning the Suldon was part of the plan, because I think they had a pretty good idea where they thought Egwene
Yeah.
was anyway, but I guess they had planned to kind of drill down and find out, okay, let's find out exactly where her room is so we don't go bumbling
Right.
around.
Or
Um,
make sure they haven't moved
but
her
yeah,
because
she
me and Farsho had been in the room, she knew, but
yes.
yeah, make sure they haven't done anything.
Oh yeah.
So you're right, their original plan is to, "Hey, let's tie her, gag her, stuff her in this horse stall, throw a little hay over her, and we go get Egwene and get out of here." But yeah, they were flexible and they changed with it as they needed to. And another fine example of how our heroes fell upward. She clasped the
Mhm.
collar on Seta and can feel her in her head, and then me and Farshaw is like, "Well, it doesn't work like that, Nynaeve. They have to be able to channel." And and even Sita
Yeah.
is laughing, she's through the gag, she's laughing, "Ah, you bunch of fools." And then she starts basically, in her mind, switching her, which is Nynaeve's thing.
Hmm.
Nynaeve is somehow a subconscious, projection of Robert Jordan's desire to throw spankings into the series all throughout all throughout the story, every
Yeah.
book, because Nynaeve loves to get a hickory after people and switch them. Yeah, that was her thing back in Emmons
Yeah.
Field. That they talked about her carrying that stick around she'd pop somebody on the head with, but I think she much rather would get a very, lithe switch and just leave red stripes on their legs. But yeah, she mentally does
Yeah.
this to Sita, and, they find out, hey, there's something more to this Suldam business, and they're linked to the ADOM than what everybody first thought.
Yeah, and I like how she's still very grossed out by that and changes her plans accordingly. Again, there's no way we could put this on
Right.
Elaine. Um, and we've got to make do with what we have. And you're right, it is serendipity and it worked well, but at the same time, she's still working well with this new information and being able to delegate
Right.
tasks to the others. It seems like, and this may just be because it's an unreliable narrator situation and we don't know how much Elaine and Min actually contributed to this plan, but it looks like from the chapters we have here that Nynaeve planned all of this and she gave roles to the other two for this kind of heist movie type thing and they are ready to follow along, except Elaine gets a little scared of the ADOM and Nynaeve has to talk her up and everything, and Min and Elaine both get a little too overzealous several different times. where Nynaeve has to talk them down or scold them for making a bigger scene than they could have. Rolling her eyes at, where are we going?
Yes.
Into the lion's den to dance with the dark one. Okay, we're gonna go bust out a
Right.
demone. Or when they yell at the demone, "Hey, we're friends!" Just these
Oh,
weirdos who
yeah.
popped off the collar start running towards her. Yeah, so Nynaeve has to do quite a bit to keep them in line, and seems like she really is the brains of the
Right.
operation in this case. And like I said, I don't know that she has that role much later throughout the series. She really shines here, but I want to see when. I don't know that it's so much that she starts to fade in any way. I think it's more that the other characters around her grow to fill that gap so that they're more like equals. I think it's more of Elaine's confidence and stuff coming up to match
Well,
hers, but I'm not sure. I'll just have
no,
to keep
that
an eye
that
on
was
it.
well said because really you don't see any of the main characters of this story fading so much. You see the bad
Mhm.
guys fade. I mean, you see Padon Fane going from being, the Dark One's right-hand man, it seems like, to being nothing, and you see the Forsaken going from, every child's boogeyman nightmare to, to nothing, to being destroyed easily. Um, but the good guys, men, women, impartially, you see them grow. You don't see them really fade back very often in any of the characters, even secondary, tertiary characters. People like Talonvor and folks that don't have a big role in the series. The series would go on just fine if they were nowhere in it, but you see them growing. You see them becoming better. Um, and that's one thing I love about this. It's not just the farm boy becomes a knight in shining armor, but everybody impartially in the series, has that chance or that opportunity to grow, to be better. Okay, well, I'm going to back up because I just remembered Gawain, and yeah, he doesn't.
Well, he had chances to.
Yes, but
So
yeah,
you
you're
didn't
right.
actually misspeak
You're right.
there.
Yeah, I did it first, then I turned it into chances. So yeah,
Yeah, he
yeah,
had opportunities. He just
right.
squandered them.
Exactly, exactly. He was not so much a bad character as a good character who didn't play the hand that was dealt him very well. He was definitely not Taverin. But yeah, here just the fact that the person they chose was, the Soldam was very experienced, but this Damane obviously was not. Had she been a
Mhm.
well-trained Damane from Xianqian culture who had been brought there, who had been a Damane 150 years or something, when they released her, she would have fought them. Just
Yeah.
as we see with the Damane, they've been under the
I don't
leash.
think Nynaeve knows how to make shields yet
Right,
for
no.
Elaine.
No, that
So if they did, I mean, that's something we could see people doing with ease later in the series. Okay, we're
right,
gonna stun these people, shield the channeler, wrap somebody up in air with the flows and gag them or whatever. Which I guess even if they knew how to do those things, which I don't think they have, any of them have that facility with the power
no,
yet.
no,
Even if they did, that's still going to draw a lot more attention. So it actually still wouldn't have worked out
right,
well. I can't think of a way that they maybe could have disabled that demone quickly enough.
right. So it was just, you know, Taverin-like luck that the one they
Yeah.
randomly chose was probably a girl from Falma, because of the way she
Mhm.
punched the Suldam and then just turned and ran away. She wasn't wanting to be rescued by the girl so much as she saw her chance as she got away, probably went back to family who would welcome her because they're not Xian Chan in their way of thinking. So, she had somewhere to go. She had people who loved her and somewhere to be.
Mhm.
And that's where she went. She didn't stay to ask questions or thank anyone. She hit the road, Jack, and yeah, got out of there. And I don't really blame her. I believe most people fairly new to the collar would take whatever chance to run and get back to familiar territory. They wouldn't want to
Right.
waste time with strangers they didn't know.
I'll let you go ahead and take us into your summary of chapter 46.
All right. So we'll move on into chapter 46 entitled To Come Out of the Shadow. Nynaeve noticed that people looked at her differently when she was wearing the dress of a Suldam. There was some commotion somewhere else in town, but it did not seem to concern them right now, and Nynaeve reminded Sita to keep it that way. The Suldam had as much desire for secrecy as the girls did. Men Farshaw led them up to the kennels on the upper floor, where they heard weeping, and they could all feel the oppression and hopelessness in the air. Egwene looked up when they entered her room and said that she knew she wasn't dreaming, or she would have seen Rand and Galad instead. Nynaeve freed Egwene from her collar, then let go of the one source as Egwene changed into a normal dress. Egwene gave some brief descriptions of what she had wanted to do to Sita now that the tables were turned, then explained, after Nynaeve chided her for not escaping since she was in the room all by herself, explained how the Adom will not let you remove it yourself, or even touch the one power at all without permission. She also shared her theory, now proven, that all Suldam are women who can learn to channel. The Damane are the stronger girls who would have learned anyway, but the Suldam all can learn to channel. And right in the middle of the discussion, Rena, another Suldam, walks into the room, demanding to know what was going on. Egwene quickly hit her in the stomach with a pitcher, then took her own Adom and snapped it around the woman's neck. Egwene had to hold her hands over Rena's mouth to contain the screams as she gave the Suldam a taste of her own medicine. Nynaeve then stopped Egwene from going any further and told her, quote, "That isn't what you want," end quote. Egwene turned and hugged Nynaeve and sobbed out her story of all the torture, of how she wanted to kill them for the pain they had caused. Nynaeve comforted her and explained the difference between revenge and justice. Then she put the bracelet on a peg on the wall and told the two former Suldam that if they deserved to be free, then the wheel would weave a way that would allow them to free themselves. Otherwise, they would receive justice for their actions. The girls all left the building and quietly headed for the shipyard, then saw squads of Xiantian soldiers approaching ahead and behind. Nynaeve reminded all the girls that they were not under suspicion, they could just walk right on by. But Egwene declared that she would die before being collared again. Then she embraced the source and said, quote, "Let me show them what they taught me," end quote. And then the very paving stones beneath the soldiers erupted in fiery explosions. Egwene turned and did the same to the other group of soldiers from behind. Then all the girls ran as huge fireballs began arcing from other parts of the city. The Xianchen Damane had seen what was happening and were reacting. Anger boiled up in Nynaeve, and she embraced the source and began fighting back, hoping to herself that Baal Doman had that ship ready to sail.
There's a few things I noticed in this chapter that I wonder. Let me say that over again. I think I was making noise. There's a few things in this chapter that I'm gonna want to keep an eye on to see how they progress throughout the rest of Nynaeve's arc, because right now she talks about how it feels so good to hold Sidar and she doesn't want to let it go, even though she has to. She said, this wouldn't be a weird place inside the kennels for somebody to feel channeling going on, but we don't want to take any chances.
Mhm.
I just wonder when she starts to get more used to that, even though we know she can't access the power at will until she breaks her block in book 7. I think eventually she gets over that high or learns how to cope with it better, but it's still, for most of the channelers this early on in the books, they mention it every time they channel. It feels
Yes.
so good and it was so difficult to give it up, but she had to do that and had to keep her eye on the prize, and she did a good job of that here. And she also, another thing I want to keep an eye on the future, because we know the Adom with Nynaeve comes up again. She thinks about how gross it is to wear the bracelet and how she feels disgusting, soiled for having used it. She hopes she never has to do something like this again. And it's just dark foreshadowing for her later hanging on to Mo Gideon with one that Elaine makes for them later in Saladar. So I kind of want to watch that progression of how she changes her mind about it, because even though she knows that this is a person that has hurt people like Egwene and maybe even Egwene herself, she finds it to be a very disgusting thing to be like Suldam in any way,
Right.
which is the message that she gives Egwene too when she talks about justice with the girls also.
Right. Yeah, you don't want to become them. Yes. And
Yeah,
then,
yeah.
yeah,
And I
to
think
it.
that's a very powerful Nynaeve moment. That's one of my favorite instances of her leadership, is her talking them down from killing these women.
Right. Well, and even the the fact that she gave up the source, let go of the power at
Mhm.
that point. It does talk about the addictive nature of it, or the addictive feeling of holding
Yeah.
on to it. But at the same time, Nynaeve can only access it when she's angry. And I think the responsible part of her may have realized, I don't need to hold on to it right now while I'm seeing and hearing just what all they've done, because I think she could have killed them herself. So to be
Yeah.
responsible, I think one of the reasons she let go of the source was so she wouldn't, so the anger wouldn't take over, so she wouldn't go
Oh, that's a
too
great
far,
point.
because that that would be a difficult thing, when someone has
Mhm.
been torturing, a child that you babysat, and someone you've
Oh,
known since from their infancy, and this is a person you really care about, and you hear about some of the torture they went through at the hands of these people. It would be difficult not to dispense some vengeance right then. So what she's
mhm.
telling Egwene is true, and it's good. There is a difference between vengeance and justice, but I think she's kind of reminding Nynaeve of that too. That, okay, I've got
Yeah.
to, yeah, okay, we got to do the right thing here. I don't want to do the right thing, but I've got to. Now, it doesn't give any evidence that that's an internal battle going on, or an internal
Mhm.
dialogue. That's just my thoughts, and I wonder if that doesn't play into it somewhat.
It's consistent with how she doesn't ever admit any of her own faults, right? Or she
Yes,
kind of speaks to somebody else's fears when she's thinking the same thing they are, or something like that.
right,
Um, she does that even in these chapters we've read already today.
right,
Um, I really like this moment with her, especially the fact that it has her recalling that she used to help dispense justice in the Two Rivers. This is part of how we find out that being a wisdom is not just the healing arts. It's a very important position that is part of the local government. Basically, she would help dispense justice, and in cases in which people thought they would maybe get an easier time from the women's circle than the village council.
right,
Um, she let them know that, she wasn't going to just allow vengeance or enact vengeance, but that justice still did need to be applied. And she made it sound like justice needs to be very specific and targeted based on what these people did, which is how she redirects people here. It's not just like I need to hurt this person because they've hurt somebody I care about. She disables these women in a very specific way that prevents them from being a threat to them in the future. Now,
right,
it doesn't prevent them from being a threat to anybody, unfortunately. But I did not remember, as you said earlier, really didn't connect Rena and Seta to knowing them later, like in the circus with Matt. And even, my second read through of the series when we were doing our Matt chapters and stuff, I still had not connected these Falma events
right.
that well with the Rena and Seta and then Bethman that we know later. And that's just going to color my reread the next time I go through those chapters, because it's this tragic irony almost. I don't think it's exactly the right word for it, but I just wish Matt had known that Rena, that he had to order killed and be so anguished about it. I wished he had known that she was somebody who hurt Egwene to this degree. Rena
Right.
was her main Suldam. Four
Yes.
times out of five, Egwene said she was the one that had the bracelet on. And so we've seen how Matt, and I know I'm just devolving back into our season two, but
Oh,
I can't help but think about it now. That I just wish that Matt had been able to maybe be at more peace with what he had to do
right,
because of that.
right. Yeah, absolutely. Would not have been as traumatized by the event, perhaps.
Yeah.
Even though he didn't fire the arrow, he gave the order. He felt like the blood
Mhm.
was on his hands. But
Yeah.
she did bring that on herself. It's hard to say she deserved it,
Mhm.
because, again, oh, there are many things people deserve that they don't get, and many things people get that they don't deserve. And it's not really my place to say someone deserves what happens to them, um,
Mm.
but
Right.
I think it would have helped his conscience, excuse me, had he known that. Yeah,
Mhm.
after viewing these things in so much detail, it, I do feel a lot better about that, And like you, yeah,
Yeah,
felt like
that's sick, Robert Jordan. How could you keep that information from Matt? It's so tantalizing.
yes, yeah, so many things in the story are this way. Now, one thing too, I'm going back to the chapter Blade Master that you
Mhm.
covered a little bit ago. When they had Sita in the stables, and of course, they're going over what they're going to do, talking about their plan, and it's a little bit of hypocrisy with Nynaeve. She's telling Elaine, "Okay, well, the dress won't fit you; it'll come closer to fitting me, so you'll have to wear the collar." But she's thinking to herself, "There is no way I would die before I put that collar on."
Yeah.
And she's trying to convince Elaine, "This is what you need to do. Yeah, it's fine.
Mhm.
Just put it on. It's not going to be a problem. Don't be afraid. Don't be worried about it." But she's thinking to herself, "There's no way she could put it on." Then after she experiences what it's like to have someone collared by, collaring Sita, then she says, "There's no way I could put this on Elaine." But until that moment, she's ready to talk Elaine into it, the whole time thinking, "There's no way I would put it on. I would die before I put that nasty thing on."
Yeah.
So she has these hypocritical moments that she
Oh, yeah.
doesn't seem to struggle with. And she thinks it, but then she just moves right ahead because we don't have time to dwell on these negative things. We've got to keep going. And I like that about her character. I find this funny or ironic circumstances, many of them here with Nynaeve, is when she's thinking one thing but saying something totally different. But yeah, in her mind, coming back and just saying, "Well, yeah, I will convince you to do this, but there ain't no way that I'm doing it. Nobody could put that on me." So just one of those funny things about her character that I like. It makes the story enriching to me.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I'm not saying it's a good trait. I'm not saying you should emulate it, but it's one I do find a lot of dramatic irony in it, some humor in the way she does that over and over throughout the series. And so those are the little moments I enjoy looking for. Um, so anyway, back to where we are now as they're walking into the kennels. Um, Nynaeve notices how people are looking at her, or sometimes not looking at her, because she has on the
Mhm.
dress with the lightning bolts and has a collared woman, chained to her wrist. And that's a very true thing about human nature. And I'm glad Robert Jordan worked this into the story in this way. People do look at you differently based on certain expectations. I never knew to what degree until many years ago. It's been 15, 16, 20 years ago. I don't remember, a long time. I lost a considerable amount of weight.
Mm.
And I noticed that people looked at me differently, especially women. Not to say it made me especially attractive or women were not throwing themselves at my feet, but you just see it in their eyes that they look at you differently when you're, uh, you know, eh, and have a good physique as compared to being very overweight. And and it's a very subtle thing, and it's hard to define it. And again, it didn't have any huge changes in my life, other than health wise. But you just notice that oftentimes people are looking at you differently. And so Nynaeve finds out just by putting on this outfit and wearing this bracelet, walking down the street, people look at me entirely differently. Where before she was just
Mhm.
someone in the crowd, now she's someone eyes notice her and then look away and look down, and the crowd kind of parts for them. And it's very subtle and very small, but very noticeable when you're the object of it. Now, she never
Mhm.
noticed this, how other people looked at Suldam and Damane until she was impersonating one of them. So, like I said, a very
Yes.
small, simple thing, but all of society and every society, you can put yourself in different situations where people view you and treat you entirely differently.
Absolutely. I think Nynaeve is only just learning this because if we think about her position in the Two Rivers, Emmons Field is a small enough village that people aren't really going to be known so much by the groups that they belong to. There's really just the one in group of being a villager.
Right.
And then there's also gender lines, like being on the women's circle or the village council, those types of things. There are a few in groups and out groups, but for the most part, it's a fairly culturally homogeneous and even class-wise homogeneous group of people. So
Well, let me
she,
stop you there. There's the
oh,
Coplans and the Congers. So,
okay, well that's a great point, but they are
but
still
still,
like farmers, right? And
right,
pretty much
right.
everybody's farmers except for the
Yeah,
mayor. So there, even though there are differences in who is liked or disliked or some status, as far as like economics, people are pretty close to each other.
right.
Nothing like the differences they see the first time they go to cities, and then when they go to bigger cities and there's actually
Exactly.
nobility and stuff like that.
Exactly.
So Nynaeve is not used to the idea of a uniform at all. There's just stout Two Rivers woolens that everybody wears.
Right.
And then when she goes to the White Tower, people wear nice dresses, but she gets an accepted dress after her test. And, the other girls are in novice white, which is pretty similar. You just only have the little bands of color. So she is starting to learn how people look at you when you're wearing a certain uniform and how that brings certain expectations with it. But this book is really the first time she puts on disguises or costumes or anything, uniforms at all, to really experience that. And it's something that she works with throughout the series, and something that she never gets control of until her on Riyadh, for example, or when Elaine learns how to weave the Mask of Mirrors, she gets to have some jokes with her, making her look topless in the sea folk garb and stuff like that.
Right. Right.
But I just think it's worth noting that these chapters, I think, are the first time we see Nynaeve in a disguise. She has her hair unbraided, which I didn't bring up in my previous summaries, but
Oh,
that's got to be a pretty huge deal to her.
yeah. I didn't
And
even
so
catch
even
that.
before she gets, yeah, even before they get the Suldam and Damane dresses and do that switcheroo, they're in for a few weeks. They've been in the local village garb from outside of town, and she was already reflecting on how that really helped them to blend in. And she's never had to try to do anything like that before. Nobody noticed them. They were just eating apples over here, watching the street, but they could be anybody who couldn't
Right.
afford to eat in an inn or
Right.
whatever. So, yeah, it's interesting watching her explore that. I guess taking on different positions, social positions that she didn't even really understood exist. She didn't really understand those positions even existed or what they entailed
Right.
until she has to step into those shoes.
Right. And I threw out the comment about Coplans and Congers trying to be a little bit funny, but you
Yeah,
do notice in the eye of the world there is a very clear delineation. No one really respects the Coplans and the
yeah,
Congers, and someone says something silly. Well, that's just like Copland talk from a Conger. They throw these
mm,
these comments out there amongst themselves. But then you look later on in the series when Perrin is leading Two Rivers men into battle, that there are Coplans and Congers along with them, and none of them are described as being shiftless. None of them are described as being lazy or no good
yeah,
because they're all Two Rivers men. So,
yeah. There are other out groups to compare themselves to, so
right,
they're all together as the in group.
right,
Yeah,
yeah. As long as we're together, we can fight amongst ourselves or bicker amongst ourselves. But you let an outsider pick on any of us, and we're all going to be there with each other. And that small town mentality is very evident throughout this series, and I do like that. And from some of his um, interviews, Robert Jordan talked about his how he thought heroes would act coming from these small towns. So he really understood that, and I think worked those things into the story
mhm.
intentionally to give that feeling of very rural people standing up to positions of greatness and just how they view the world. And I found a lot of accuracy in it.
Yeah. I think he draws upon that personal experience well, and it's something that also coming from a small town, I can really sympathize with. That's one reason I love the Eye of the World from the beginning, is watching these characters, um, come into bigger and bigger cities and be kind of dazzled by that, and have to
Right.
always adapt to something new, new cultures and those types of things. Um, I really enjoy that about it. It mirrors, I feel like, my youth quite a bit. um,
Yeah, I definitely understand that. It, and I really feel sympathy for the Emmonsfielders early on when they came to Barrowline and they couldn't imagine such a
yeah.
huge city
Hmm.
and all these people and they're talking about the big city and Tom is laughing at them openly and he doesn't explain why and the reader understands it but no one from Emmonsfield does because They're in this huge city of Barrelon. It has these, wooden palisade walls. And, when they get to Camlin, Rand even has it in his mind of, oh my gosh, I looked so stupid back in Barrelon thinking that was a big city. And I've done similar things, in my life growing up in a small town, go to a place that I thought when went off to college, I thought I was in the big city, and it was just a slightly larger town.
Yeah.
So, and looking back on it now, it's kind of hilarious, the kind of thoughts that I had. But anyway, I hope everyone will join us next time for episode 4 when we're going to cover The Dragon Reborn, chapters 29 and 51.
Wheel of Mind is written by Lajara and Giskel and produced by Lajara. Our theme music was composed by Wendigo. You can find his new Lairs EP on SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube, and I'll put those links in the description. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the Wheel of Mind, but this is an ending. So to catch a beginning next time an episode drops, subscribe to us, The Wheel of Mind, on Podbean, Stitcher, iTunes, or Spotify, and you can also find our episodes on YouTube under the channel name Lajara Dane. That's LaJaradayne. To leave feedback, you can rate and review on whichever platform you use to listen to us, or you can contact us at lajaradane@gmail.com or @mind_wheel on Twitter. You can also support the show by subscribing to us on Patreon by visiting patreon.com/wheelofmind.